Round and round and round goes the coaching carousel. Jake Dickert, Wake Forest, opening in Pullman. Boom, insert Jimmy Rogers, which just feels like an American football coach's name, doesn't it? Or a player, or just that just feels like someone who is belonging in the coaching realm in football. And Jimmy Rogers is really good. You talk about a rapid riser. He's 37 years old. He's 37. You can view Washington State however you like, a de facto Power 4 head job, a high-end G5 job, a trending down G5 job. You see it however you want. I just watched Jake Dickert earlier this season pick up wins against multiple Power 4 teams, one of which Texas Tech ended up going 8-4. Washington State thrashed them in Pullman, and he had them in position, Jake Dickert did, to be in consideration for the college football playoff. And that's before the Pac-12 expands with its new team starting in 2026. That was this season. So they stumbled down the stretch, no doubt about it. But the question of whether Washington State could make itself a playoff team in the 12-team era for 2025 is yes, it's absolutely possible. Because if you're capable of beating Washington, they are. They just did it this year. You pick up other Power 4 wins, well, suddenly their schedule isn't all that difficult compared to what it perhaps used to be. But if you have a great record, you can be in that sort of spot. So it's hard to not like on paper hiring Jimmy Rogers. That doesn't mean it's automatically going to work. I'll get to that in a moment. But the upside here for Rogers up in Pullman is he just saw that getting close to or in the discussion of a college football playoff at-large team is possible, which is one of the reasons, of course, he's taking this job coming from South Dakota State. But the other reason that it's hard to not like this on paper is he's a young up-and-comer, seems very ambitious. He's just 37 years old. And for the last several years, he has built South Dakota State or been a part of building South Dakota State into a premier player at the FCS ranks, which is very impressive. They won back-to-back national championships, lost in the semifinals this year to North Dakota State, but that's a wildly successful 3-year run. But here's what I love most about his coaching trajectory. South Dakota State is a rival or has become a rival of sorts. I'm not exactly dialed into that particular rivalry. I'm more of a brawl of the wild guy, Montana State at the FCS ranks. But North Dakota State, for those who don't know, has been the Alabama of FCS football for the last decade plus, except they've done it with multiple coaches. They've had guys move on and then they just keep on winning. They're incredibly invested. They have a great fan base. They're in the national championship game against Montana State this year. They were the dynasty of the sport. And all of a sudden, South Dakota State just rose up and threw a couple of right hooks and knocked them out and won a couple of titles. This is the FCS equivalent of at the peak of Nick Saban's run at Alabama, Auburn rising up and winning a couple of national titles and being better than North Dakota State in the process. That's what happened over the last couple of years. So that's one reason that I like it. Another reason is if you're anywhere in the Dakotas, you understand frigid temperatures and a small town feel. What do you have up in Pullman, Washington? Frigid temperatures, small town feel, and another similarity, a lack of a huge recruiting base. So here's a guy, Chris Collinsworth, yes, I heard it as well. Now here's a guy that understands all those elements and is going to attempt to translate them to the new job he has at Washington State. On the surface, on paper, this looks good. This looks really good. You get a guy who's hungry. You're giving him his first FBS head coaching position. There should be a translatable feel. And in the short term, he might be able to stabilize the ship without suffering a regression year like Oregon State did this season. Oregon State had everybody that of note for the most part hit the portal after Jonathan Smith departed, and they felt that this year. They started 4-1. They end up 5-7. They've got momentum at the moment because Malik Murphy's there, and that generates a lot of excitement when you go get one of the top transfer portal quarterbacks available in the entire country, and you bring him to Corvallis. Well, Washington State has had plenty of guys leave the program, but they could now have an influx of guys because, remember, the portal is officially closed to enter Oh, but wait, there's a rule. If your head coach leaves at any point in time, you have a 30-day window to enter the transfer portal and find a new home. So how many of those South Dakota State players want to follow Coach Rogers to Pullman and say, I want to try my luck at the next level? Because we just watched Curt Cignetti do that over at Indiana, not from the FCS ranks, but still a jump in competition. You go from the Sun Belt at James Madison to the Big Ten, and they went 11-1. You could see a similar sort of way. It hasn't happened at this time, but it certainly could. And that would start, perhaps, with the quarterback, Mark Gronowski, who is a graduate transfer, has 1 year of eligibility left, I believe. I mean, guys can get 6th and 7th and 8th years and whatnot, but he'd be a graduate transfer. He is in the portal. That is a guy who FBS programs are going to look at, who they'll say, wow, he's played a lot of college football. He's got over 10,000 passing yards in his career. That's somebody that I want to have come play quarterback for my team. But if he's in the portal and his coach just left to go to Pullman, 3 guesses as to where he's most likely to end up. And Washington State, as a fan base, as a community, they have to dig their heels in and say, you know what? We can feel sorry for ourselves because the modern college football world in a lot of ways is passing us by, or we can try to make the best of it and understand that this guy needs to have every opportunity to succeed. So Gronowski could be the start. That's a guy I'd look at. And if you want an indicator that he's heading there and not to another Power 4 school somewhere, Zevi Eckhouse, who started the Holiday Bowl for Washington State, in which they were competitive. They lost by 17, but they were underdogs by 18.5 points or so. So a nice little solid cover. Their defense struggled because they had a bunch of losses and they didn't have, a staff that they had throughout the year coaching the actual game. Jake Dickert was rooting them on from afar. At least that's what he said in a tweet. I'm sure he was. Let's just say I found that strange, to say the least. Haven't seen that one before. Coach leaves a program before a bowl game, leaves the fans and the players hanging, and then, I'm rooting for you guys. I don't know if that's landing incredibly well. But that's not where Washington State fans' focus should be. It should be on giving Jimmy Rogers the opportunity to succeed, and this is the question that I have. What sort of funding mechanism can Washington State put together annually to keep themselves in the hunt? To be able to go out and on the field beat a Washington who's a Big Ten bowl team and a Texas Tech who's a Big 12 bowl team. How can you go out and have the resources to put together that sort of roster? I don't know the answer. I'm just wondering if they can. I saw Dickert do it, but it has felt for the last couple of years like maybe they have faded because they don't have the depth of talent across the board on both sides to sustain over a 12-game season. Or maybe the coaching staff just faltered. Maybe it was their fault more than anything else, which is, of course, what a coach is going to say publicly, but we got to take those things with a grain of salt because coach speak is a very real thing. Over the second half of each of the last 2 seasons, Washington State has been a much different team than they were in the first half. I mean, first half of this year, ranked in pushing towards the second half, I should say. They were 8-1. Then they lost their final 3 games, but they were inside the top 20. They were kind of getting a little bit of discussion on shows like this one or others of, hey, could they be an at-large team? What if they finish 11-1? They'd at least be in the discussion with those 9-3 SEC teams. Probably would have wound up in the same spot. But just being there carries real value for a university and a football brand that is just trying to remind everyone, hey, we're still here, still relevant, and we can play football at a high level. And the year prior, they started 4-0. They got up to number 13 in the country. And then the second half crater again followed for the Cougs. So that's the number one thing Jimmy Rogers can do to ease the minds of Washington State fans in his first season. But I'm curious to see what this roster is going to look like. Are they going to be able to have players that can at least give them a solid floor of production? Can they notch more Power 4 victories as they have in the last couple of years in the non-conference that people turn their head and go, lost to who? Wisconsin lost to who? Again? Remember, Jake Dickert beat Wisconsin 2 years in a row. Beat Washington this year. Beat Texas Tech at home. Those are really important wins. So can they continue having that level of success? Not just for the short term in the 12-team playoff, but for the long term when the Pac-12, whenever that is, adds an eighth full member team or full sports team, that is, and then they're trying to get into the college football playoff as one of the highest ranked conference champions, is Washington State going to be in that discussion? Are they going to keep up with Oregon State? Are they going to be able to ascend to Boise State's level, who they couldn't beat on the road this year? Those are the questions that I have that Washington State has to answer. But for Jimmy Rogers, hard to not like the opportunity for him to go and make that program what it's capable of if there is the necessary financial commitment on the other side. But for Washington State fans, I think you should absolutely be excited about this hire because this guy's track record has had one thing in common, and that's winning, and he did not do it at a place where it's necessarily easy when you've got a regional and conference foe that is the dynasty in the sport, and he was able to overcome that anyway as the associate and head coach. I think it looks pretty darn good. Appreciate everyone listening. I will see you next time, and until then, hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.